In this video, we'll go over how to build your own Embassy One. If you'd like a complete list of the equipment, please look below in the description for a link to the written DIY guide, which also contains links for where you can buy all of this equipment. The links will also be in the video description, as well as a link to the written guide, which you can follow along with for clarity and more detailed imaging. You should have your Geekworm NASPi 2, an 8GB Raspberry Pi, a solid-state drive of at least 1 TB in size, a 32GB microSD card, a speaker, a 2-pin male-to-male power wire, and a Phillips head screwdriver. If you elected to get the Noctua fan over the stock Geekworm fan, you'll need that, these 2 screws, and 2 male-to-female jumper wires. We'll need some electrical tape and some scissors, and a small Velcro strap as well to hold the cables together. Those aren't strictly necessary, but they will allow us to do a much neater job. You'll also need an Ethernet cable and a 4-amp power supply. Start by opening up the box with the NASPi in it, and then remove all the contents. Now take the case and unscrew the back plate using a Phillips head screwdriver and remove the remaining parts inside. In here you'll find the power management board, which you can just set to the side, and the Geekworm fan and attachment, which we'll use now. There'll also be some screws which you can just put to the side for now. Start by removing the fan from the bag. Set these screws to the side, and then remove the Geekworm fan that we're not going to use from the bracket. Lift the fan off and then replace it with the Noctua fan. Make sure to orient the fan so that the wire is pointing off to the left and the bracket is shown. Grab the 2 additional screws and use them to attach the fan to the bracket. Place it down, and now we'll need to connect our jumper wires to it. In this case, we're going to use the white jumper wire as the ground and the colored wire as the power. Now take a look at the 2 tabs here. We can see that on the Noctua connector, the ground connection, meaning the white cable, is going to be on the far right, and the live connection is going to be on the one next to it. In order to make sure it stays together, we're going to use some electrical tape. First we'll tape the 2 jump wires together. And then we'll tape that combined piece to the connector. And that's our fan assembled. Now it's time to attach the SSD. Remove it from the case, set it down, and then grab the breakout board for the drive. Remove the USB adapter from the back. Now you're going to need to empty out one of the packets of screws that came with the NASPi and find the 2 silver screws inside there. Now take a look at the drive. You'll see that there's power here and SATA there. Make sure to orient the drive correctly so that it slots into the corresponding slot on the board. Gently push the drive on, and then holding the drive to the board like this, we're going to use the 2 screws to attach the drive to the board in the holes shown. Now grab 4 of the female-to-female brass spacers and 1 female-to-male brass spacer, the longest of them. We're going to need the board with the SSD still. There's another bag with some smaller female-to-male spacers. Don't use these by mistake. Make sure you're using the long one here. And we'll need 3 of the button head black screws. Now underneath the board with the SSD attached, find where it says HDD, and then you're going to put the long spacer inside the hole next to it. Hold it with your finger and then attach one of the female-to-female spacers on the other side. Finger tightening is fine. And on the other 3 holes, we're going to use the button head screws. Start by putting in the screw and then use a spacer on the other side. Now you should be left with something looking like this. You've got the one spacer on this side, and then on this side you've got all four. Set the board down into the side, and then grab the Raspberry Pi and the speaker. Take the Raspberry Pi out of the case, and attach the speaker as shown here. The word speaker should be facing outwards. Now in order to attach the fan, you're going to need to tuck the speaker in like this. Now it's time to attach the Pi to the board. Take the remaining bag of spacers. There are 5 in here. One of them is slightly shorter than the others, and that one won't be necessary to use at all, so you can just discard it. Now take the Raspberry Pi and observe where the USB 3 port is on the board, and line that up with where the USB ports are on the Raspberry Pi, and place it down on the 4 spacers. Now take the 4 male to female spacers and screw them into the 4 holes. This one can be a little hard to get started, so you can just use a screwdriver for this one, but be careful not to over tighten. Now it's time to attach the fan. For this you'll need 4 of the black button head screws. Take the fan and orient it correctly on the board, making sure to tuck the speaker in correctly below the cable and in this nice little gap here. Once positioned correctly, take the 4 black screws and attach the fan to the Pi. Now it's time to attach the fan cables to the GPIO pins. If you're looking at the GPIO pins and you can see the word speaker, you want to connect the ground, in this case the white cable, to the first pin on the left of where it says speaker, while the other wire can be connected to one of the 2 5-volt pins here, or the 3-volt pin back here. The 3-volt pin is what we use when sending out pre-built embassies. It will make the Pi hotter and thus not as performant, but it will be quieter. If you'd like for the fan to be louder but cool the Pi more, then you should use one of the 5-volt pins. In this video we're going to go with a 3-volt. Now with that all connected, it's time to do the power management board. Remove the power management board from the bubble wrap, get the 2 cable power connector and 1 black button head screw. Pick up the power management board, identify the headphone jack and put it into the headphone jack output on the Raspberry Pi. That's a good way to align the board properly. Push it together slightly, but before applying any proper pressure, make sure that the USB ports are lined up. After this you can just rock the board back and forth to slowly get the connection tight. You'll know you're there once this hole here lines up with the spacer below it. Now take the black screw and screw into that hole. With that done, it's time to connect the 2-pin power wire. Connect it here and here. So now it's time to do some cable management. We're going to use the Velcro to strap these 2 cables together. The main point with these 2 cables is that they never come into contact with the fan, as that will damage things and affect your embassy's ability to cool itself. Tuck the cables in as shown here. Ensure that the fan can spin freely. Bend the connection over here one more time, and then grab the Velcro and strap this whole thing together. Done. Next is to make sure the embassy turns on automatically if there's ever a power cut and the power comes back on again. So we remove this connector here and put it just above there, where it says auto on. Now it's time to put it inside the case. Start by identifying where the power button is, and then line this up to the inside of the case. The fan will also line up with the grill on the case. It's better to insert it from the back to make sure the cables don't come away from where they're nestled while you push it in. Now gently rock it back and forth to push it inside. Make sure that none of the wires come loose from where you've nestled them. Lift up the brass spacers like this to get it all the way in. And make sure you're aligned properly. You'll know that you're properly aligned and the thing is fully inside the case when you see the power button protruding just like this. Now that you're all lined up right and you can see that the spacers line up with the holes in the case, it's time to take the 4 black flathead screws and use them to attach the case. You can leave them a little slack so it's easier to fit the back plate on. Now it's time to attach the back plate, and you'll need 2 more flathead screws for this. The back plate will click on and fit very obviously into position, but it's quite likely that the pie isn't nestled quite right. In this case we used a screwdriver just to nudge it into place, but I don't recommend doing this in the power port. Probably just use your finger in one of the USB slots to get the thing aligned right. Now take the 2 screws and screw them into the 2 holes on either side of the back plate. You might need to start them off with your fingers. And be careful not to cross thread. With that done, you can now go ahead and finish tightening the screws on the bottom of the case. And then it's time to add the rubber feet. Now it's time to attach the USB adapter to the back. Attach it to the 2 lower USB ports as shown here. It should look like this when connected. In this demonstration we've used the metal plate on the front, but the case does come with an acrylic option which will improve connectivity if you want to connect your embassy via Wi-Fi rather than Ethernet. If you want to use this instead of the metal plate, you'll need to peel the front and back off of this acrylic panel and then take the front plate off and replace it with this. It can be pretty tricky to get this thing off. Now you'll need to remove the metal front plate, which requires a hex tool or Allen key. Now it's time to insert the Embassy OS SD card. Turn it upside down relative to the case and carefully insert it into the slot. Tilt it so that the card points up slightly as you push it in. If you accidentally miss the slot, it might fall off inside the case and then you'll have to take it apart to get the SD card out. Now all that remains is to connect the Ethernet cable and then the power cable. Now please switch over to the Embassy initial setup video to see what to do next.